All right, now this morning at, I think about 10 o'clock, the Statistics New Zealand released the inflation figures for New Zealand, and they were at the, of the estimates that I saw of what it was going to be amongst the economists, the economists got it right, the Reserve Bank didn't. I mean, they're only 0.1% out, but nevertheless, it was 2.2, not 2.3%. But it's an incredibly sharp drop in just one quarter, from 3.3 to 2.2%, which rather suggests that the economy has, and this is, and other things I guess, but the economy really has slowed down enough to get inflation under control and to bring it within the 1 to 3% range that the Reserve Bank is targeted with, or is at least legislated with. Joining us to see what this means and to give us some inkling of what next will occur in the economy, our esteemed economic, political, social, cultural commentator, Craig Stobo, still with his moustache, and it's looking magnificent, Craig. This is looking something else, my friend. Well done. Good to see you again, mate.
Thanks, Michael.
Hey, 2.2. That's low. Yeah? I mean, what happens next?
Yeah.
Interest rate cuts?
Yeah, so just look at the numbers a bit more before we get on to what happens next. So just so we're clear, 2.2% for the September year, and that's broken down into tradables inflation, which is fell minus 1.6, and your sticky non-tradables that was spoken about before sitting up at 4.9. The Reserve Bank's always been concerned about the stickiness of that. But when you look at September quarter, a big contributor to that quarterly number of 0.6 that contributes to the 2.2, a big contributor around about 50% was rates. And rates rose 12.2% on average across New Zealand. But that's a one-off contribution to the stats, right? The other contributions, vegetables, pharmaceutical products, contributed to the rise. And offsetting that rise was petrol down 6.5% and early childhood education for some reason down as well. So the real message is if you take that rates rise out, because it's a one-off every year, your annual rates bill comes out about now, then it would be a lot lower non-tradables. So we were at 3.3 in June year, we're now at 2.2. As the RBNZ said in its most recent statement, they expected the CPI to be within the 1 to 3% band, and they're right, it is within the band. And their forecasts in August expected 2% in June 26 and an OCR of 3. Now, my question for all of us is, if the CPI is already at the middle of the band and non-tradables inflation is going to fall further, aren't we there now?
Yeah.
So do we need any further drops in the OCR is my question, because they've delivered on their inflation mandate of between 1 to 3 already. So the question is, how far should the OCR go before it starts stimulating activity and we go back to what, and I'm sure none of us want this at all, go back to Minister Seymour's concerns about the roller coaster. Because bear in mind, we've been down to sub 1 up to a high of 5.5% OCR, thinking about 5.65, and now we're at 4.75, and inflation is within the target. So this will be exercising everyone's minds now. How much further should we drop that cash rate when it seems as though we want, ideally, more stable OCR, not the roller coaster referred to by Minister Seymour? So, nirvana, are we there now?
It's a fair question you ask about the rates too, because although it's a one-off this year, rates aren't projected to drop much in the long-term plans of councils next year, Craig. So one presumes that this time next year, you'll be measuring that one-off effect again, will you?
Yes, that's correct. That's right. That's my understanding, yes.
And so then the other thing that you...
In the interim, other inflationary forces are diminishing. The rents didn't come through as an item that I might have expected to come through. So are they buttoning off? That was a concern in the last 2 quarters. It seems to be not a major contributor to the September numbers. So maybe price expectations are just coming back to where the Reserve Bank wants them to be, and they'll be monitoring, changing inflation expectations, because that sort of sets behaviour. But if firms can't raise prices, and if consumers are still careful with their budgets and are switching consumption to cheaper goods and services, that will help constrain price increases in aggregate.
Yes, I think I'm glad you mentioned that last point, because whatever the OCR and whatever the inflation rate, and I'm sure at a macro level there'll be some happy smiles in the beehive today, the truth of the matter is New Zealanders are still going through a cost of living crisis.
Yeah, and that sort of goes to issues around, real wage increases, real benefit increases. So I'm sure in many cases the horrendous inflation impulse in the last 3 years has eroded real purchasing power. So some people will not have caught up with their incomes, purchasing power, because of what's happened from inflation. So, the question that is really on my mind, I'm sure it's in the RBNZ's mind and commentators in the marketplace, is, how much further should the OCR go before it stimulates activity and we go on another ride again? So arguably the case is for more careful consideration of the path now, because you're already there on a headline basis.
So are you thinking to yourself, and if would your pick be that the Reserve Bank won't make any difference to the OCR ahead of the next inflation quarter?
Well, no. That their track published in August has a track down to 3% in the OCR by 2026. My question is, does arriving at 2.2 in September mean that the need to go to 3% or track is necessary for a start, because they're already there, and being really cautious about stimulating when we know from the government's accounts, the government is still a net stimulator of the economy because of the structural deficit issues raised last week. So they just have to be a little bit careful around stimulating too much and having another problem with inflation moving above 3%. So
if the OCR comes down again, though, Craig, if the OCR comes down again, is it inevitable that leads to inflationary pressures on housing and the house prices go up again, and then we're back into the cycle?
That's it. So what I think market participants want, who use interest rates for projects, for construction, for pricing, all sorts of investment opportunities, stability is highly valued. It's like an OCR that moves less, is less volatile, would be valued. So I'm sure the RBNZ's thinking about the kind of the bands of where the OCR can move to, and what OCR is important for that stability piece, keeping inflation steady at approximately 2%, or within the band anyway, and allowing growth to continue without contributing to inflation. That's the tricky bit for the RBNZ, but it's an important piece for us to think about.